During the recent federal election campaign, the Liberals promised that by 2030, electric vehicles would make up 50% of Canadian auto sales. And by 2035, the federal government always says they'll make up 100%. However, new modeling from Dr. Jonn Axsen, heads the Sustainable Transportation Action Research Team at Fraser University and Clean Energy Canada, says that there is not much chance that we will hit that target with current policy. So I'm going to talk to him about that. Welcome to the interview, John.
Oh, thanks for having me. Thanks for having me. Yes.
Now, your modeling shows that probably the best we can hope for is 24% by 2030. Why is that?
Yeah, well, it's just we still have a big gap in policy. Now, the federal government has been doing a lot with climate policy in general. We have carbon pricing, we have a clean fuel standard coming, and we have more recently, a bit of an uptick in the vehicle emission standard. So all that does something to get us towards our greenhouse gas goals. But we're still not nearly doing enough to get on track to make zero emissions vehicles happen in a big way. Definitely not enough for the 2030 goals, and certainly not enough for 100% by 2035.
Now, your study makes the point that there is a policy option available to Canada that's already being pursued by BC and Quebec. Could you explain that, please?
Yeah, so we bring attention to the zero emissions vehicle mandate, and that's been in California since 1990. So there's a long history there of that policy, and a lot of research has shown how it's helped to drive a lot of the innovation that's occurred over the last decades. And in a nutshell, it requires automakers to sell a minimum market share of electric vehicles, some combination of plug-in hybrid or fully electric vehicles, with enough of a penalty for non-compliance that it's in the automakers worthwhile to do that.
So one part of your modeling included looking at the Canadian regulations, which closely follow the U.S. As I understand it, they're integrated. We follow the U.S. tailpipe emissions regulations. Could you explain that, please?
Yeah, the study in particular with Clean Energy Canada was looking at the vehicle emissions standard. So this has a long history in the U.S. They've been doing it since the 70s. That requires each year for automakers to improve the environmental friendliness. It used to be air pollution, but more recently it's climate change, greenhouse gas emissions, year after year. And Canada has, for the most part, in the last decade or so, been following suit with the U.S. But it got pretty complicated because we had, Obama came in with a much more stringent and low carbon version of the policy, which was great for these efforts. But then as with many things with the Trump administration, there was a weakening of the policy. And so amidst all of that, Canada has been trying to figure out, should they go their own way or should they follow the US? And so we've been watching closely what Biden has been doing. And again, with the assumption that because Biden is going back to the more stringent Obama version, it looks like Canada is more likely to follow suit with the US again.
Now, I've done a lot of interviews, John, with experts in EV adoption and sales and battery prices and so on. And their feeling is that around 2024, 2025, many or at least some EVs will begin achieving price parity, sticker price parity with internal combustion engine vehicles. And that's going to be a game changer for sales. And wondering if you took it into account. I'm sure you did, but the advances in technology and the prices that price drops that are coming.
Yeah. So first of all, absolutely, the modeling that we've been doing, it has a sophisticated representation of consumer behavior. All the things that they care about, and it's also representing what automakers are trying to do in response to changing prices for technology, as well as the policy that's there. So yeah, absolutely. We had the battery cost decline in there, and because that's a hugely uncertain forecast, we don't know exactly what's going to happen. So we included the high and low numbers in there to show that even with the most pessimistic or optimistic assumptions, that our results still hold. And I'll also point out that a lot of our research points to the fact that people are not just obviously financially driven, right? It's not just about people buying the car that's cheapest. Otherwise, everyone would be in a Yaris, right? SUVs wouldn't exist, luxury market, none of that would exist. So our model, it represents and characterizes all of these other motivations that consumers have to show that, at one point, like as battery costs come down, that can play a role. But there's all these different factors in social change, and people can become more comfortable and confident in the car. That has to be part of it. So we think that our results give a little more behavioral realism than some of those financially focused analyses.
Sure. And an interesting point that came out in your research that I wasn't aware of is that Quebec and BC, where they have mandates, most of the EV inventory in Canada is sold in those provinces, doesn't leave a lot of inventory for other provinces. And you see a mandate as being able to level the playing field.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's one thing that happens if you have, a patchwork of policies. I mean, every little bit will help. So overall, I mean, BC and Quebec, what they're doing does help to, push more development in the right direction. But it does mean that in the short run, if you're an automaker and you're looking, where do you send your electric vehicles if you only have, a few thousand or whatever available, you would prioritize making them available in the regions that are requiring you legally to sell those vehicles. And also, you would put more of your marketing efforts into those regions as well. So some of that will happen, if you don't have a national policy. And the obvious solution would be to have a national zero emissions vehicle mandate that just makes it clear all across the board that's where we're going.
Now, I don't know if you've modeled this, John, but we've been seeing recently, probably since earlier in 2021, that the automakers appear to have accelerated their switch from internal combustion engine cars to electric cars, and pouring tens of billions of dollars into new plants and other kinds of infrastructure. Given that change in the auto industry, what's your take on their ability to provide enough, to manufacture enough units to keep up with demand created by a mandate?
Yeah, I mean, so we often hear from automakers that they require something like 4 years to plan out their next manufacturing line. I mean, the number goes back and forth depending on what they're trying to talk about, but we hear that. So I feel, we have a lot of evidence now that any kind of constraints would be more in the short run. So, and that's why I myself am cautious about having a policy that would be too ambitious, like saying in 3 years, we have to go to 100% electric. That would be very extreme. But the kind of policy we're talking about over a decade, and then even 15 years out to the full zero emissions vehicle requirement, that really is in the realm of what is possible. That's exactly what automakers have been telling us is that's several 4-year cycles of being able to plan ahead, change the research and development efforts, change over the manufacturing lines to be gearing up so that first 50% and then 100% of vehicles will be electric. And the thing is, from the automaker perspective, this is all the more reason why we need that policy, right? Because again, if you were an automaker and you didn't know for sure if you were going to have to sell 50% or 100% electric vehicles, you'd kind of hedge your bets. You invest a little bit, but you might not fully commit. But if there was a national strong mandate telling you today that in 15 years you're going to have to be selling 100% electric, well, then absolutely that signal would be very clear. And that would trigger all those, those investment processes that we want to see to make it a more efficient transition for everyone.
What's your view on the need then to build out public charging infrastructure? Because surveys used to show that price was the biggest impediment to adoption. Now, range anxiety and access to charging appears to be right up at or near the top. And if you're going to put in a mandate, seems to me you have to have charging infrastructure, to service those vehicles.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, we need everything, for the whole ecosystem for electric vehicles to be developing as we go. Research for my own team, we've done a lot of work surveying consumers, looking at, what percentage of people have home recharge availability already, and who would kind of need or rely on public charging infrastructure. And really, those kind of constraints we don't see as coming up even yet. I mean, of course, any given electric vehicle owner would want more infrastructure, but there's already a lot out there that would work for a huge chunk of the population. But I would say, certainly once we get to those 50% and, up to 100%, like absolutely by that point, like talking 2030, we would need to make sure that now everyone has options, the people in multi family dwellings, people with street parking, and people with all different, types of travel patterns. So yeah, as we get more and more out there, there'd have to be a wider variety of charging options available. But I'd say like for today or even the next 5 years, we're not at a point, I wouldn't say like, oh, we don't have enough charging infrastructure to have a mandate. It's more like, let's have the mandate, and then we'll also more realistically be able to plan for how to meet everyone's needs when that becomes an issue.
Well, Jonn, thank you very much for this. Really appreciate your insights.
Oh, thanks for having me.